Welcome to Beyond the Game Sports Podcast, Episode 4. I am your host, Roman Fabbricatore. Today I will be interviewing Adam Israel, who has nearly 2 years of experience at the online sports betting company, BetMGM. Initially making his start as a ticket services representative for the Mets, he has worked as both a sportsbook operations coordinator and currently works as a sportsbook ops team lead for BetMGM. In the interview, we will be discussing his educational background at Syracuse University, his work experience as a ticket services representative for the Mets and how he attained his job at BetMGM, what inspired him to pursue a career in the sports betting industry, the ins and outs of the sports betting business, his thoughts about his current line of work, and how he feels regarding the future growth of his business and the industry as a whole. Hello, welcome to the Beyond the Game Sports Podcast. This is episode 4. I am your host, Roman Fabbricatore. I am joined by Adam Israel, who currently now is the sportsbook op team lead at BetMGM, which is a sports betting company. So I'd like to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I understand that your time is valuable, so we'll just get right into it.
Sounds good.
So, you began your education at Syracuse University. You were a student football manager?
Yeah. I worked with the equipment team as well as the director of football operations for Syracuse football. Basically, was like a coach's assistant for a few seasons, my sophomore, junior, and senior year. Helped out at practices, helped out at games, traveled with the team. Really saw a good behind-the-scenes look at the ACC football team.
So it also said that you were the head. What was it like to manage, 18 other students?
Yeah, it was definitely a weird experience. I was promoted to the head manager going into junior season. I was 19, 20 years old, kind of being the boss of a bunch of kids that were younger than me. So it was interesting to kind of have a lot of leadership and be thrown into the thick of it at a young age. But it was really, really cool to be the go-between between my bosses and directly the coaches and directly the director of football operations and the athletic director, and kind of just be the point of contact. Definitely helped get me to where I needed to be in the professional world.
Point of contact, like in intermediary type, that you're essentially in the thick of it, right?
I was the one that anybody would come to if there was any issues.
All right. So obviously you knew that you weren't going to be at Syracuse University forever.
Right.
What were your original aspirations coming out of Syracuse? Did you have a vision? Was it always sports betting, or were you trying to just find a competitive field?
Yeah, so funny story, and I don't want to take up too much of your time with this story, but when I was my first week at Syracuse, I had started in the sport management program, and our school was named after David Falk, who was Michael Jordan's agent. So we had this advisory board meeting where they brought in a bunch of industry professionals, and David Falk was there, and I was so excited to meet him. Just like every other kid that went into this program, I wanted to be an agent. So I was like, all right, I'm going to talk to David Falk, and I'm going to ask him what it takes for 18-year-old Adam to be an agent, just like him. So I get there, I built up the courage to ask him what it would take, and he answered me and just said, don't be an agent. So from week 1 of college, I was kind of thrown into a loop. COVID, to get back to your question, COVID had an impact on why I went sports gambling, just because I saw that everything kind of shut down and people were still betting. So I thought that was a good pivot. Always wanted to stay in sports. I worked for the Mets after college, and realized that I didn't really want to go down the team route anymore. I like to be a little creative, and sports betting gives me the fast-paced environment and creativity that I need. So long-winded answer, but a lot of different factors went in.
So one thing that I sort of want to pick out of that, how did COVID affect your transition from working with the Mets to BetMGM? Because I have to assume that that played a large part in your change of employment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I was working with the Mets for 2.5 seasons at that point. And when COVID happened, I was in a customer-facing role, and there were no fans coming to games. So I kind of knew the end was near for that. and I was working from home, still trying to like work in ticketing for a team during COVID. And I mean, it was impossible. So I was hunting for jobs for a while, was furloughed from the Mets because of COVID. That's how every sports team kind of worded it. But I knew that I wasn't going to go back. And I really didn't, like I said, I didn't like not being able to be creative. When you work for a team, you follow their way of doing things, and you just go by their book. And that wasn't really the way that I wanted to go about my career. So in my hunt, I was looking at everything. It was COVID, so nobody really knew what was going to happen. I was looking at sports jobs, non-sports jobs, but I knew that I wanted to stay in sports. So like that was my ultimate goal. And like I said, sports gambling was still going in the middle of COVID. People were still betting on Russian table tennis and stuff. So I quickly learned that that's where I wanted to focus. And at that point, I was applying to FanDuel and DraftKings and Caesars and MGM. But I had always kept my eye on BetMGM just because I had been to their office before. I knew a couple people that worked there. I knew about the organization, and they were hiring. And sports gambling companies stayed hiring during COVID because they were growing. When I was brought on to my team, I was employee number like 415 overall at BetMGM, and I think we just hired employee number like 1250. So when I started, it was like it's been almost 2 years, and it's now grown 3 times the size. So I saw the growth potential as a young industry professional. I thought, okay, sports gambling is a great opportunity for me to get in and really grow with the industry. And now it's 2 years and triple the size. So I think I enjoy where I'm at, and I've chosen correctly, I hope.
All right. Well, I mean, that seems to be the case. You've essentially just illustrated the point that it is a growth industry. Your workforce has essentially tripled in the span of a year and a half, 2 years. Mm-hmm. That has to spell growth. Yeah. So obviously you went in with even just a vague interest in terms of sports betting, but you also had some sports background going into the endeavor with BetMGM. Did that prior experience with the Mets help at all with how you acclimated with the BetMGM culture and environment?
It's a good question, but I think the answer is that it's completely different. It was the environment working for a team versus working for this company is like a complete 180 for me. I learned a lot with the Mets. I learned what it's like to work for a professional team, what it's like to work in a professional setting. But other than that, I had to basically start fresh and learn what it was like to have the certain leadership structure that I had, and know how to really write emails that go to VPs and C-level people. So it taught me some things, but not other things that I kind of had to pick up along the way.
What do you feel is the most effective strategy behind sports betting? Obviously, you said stats. Can you go a little more in depth, or is that something that you rather keep?
No. I mean, I think it's funny. I tell everyone when they ask, "Oh, Adam, like you work for a betting company, are you a better gambler now?" No, I'm not. I still suck. I think the answer to that is that everyone's strategy is different. But you really, if you go into and you want to be a profitable sports bettor, it starts with analyzing stats. And you don't even need to be a sports fan to really dive into it. Just to look at winning percentage at home versus away, percentage when your point guard is covered by a top defender. There's so many different factors that you can take out and just attack different markets. Like if you want to just focus on Major League Baseball home runs, there's an algorithm that you can create and a stat that you can find that will just target that one little market. So there are thousands of different ways you can look into sports betting, and for each person it's different. And it's kind of overwhelming because there are so many different ways to look at it. But personally, I bet with my heart. I've watched a lot of sports, and I try to use what I learned that way and find the stats that I care about when I'm watching games and see if they line up. But it's a spectrum of how you want to analyze the game.
Yeah, I mean, I personally am a Yankees fan. It was a little difficult to bet with your heart for that Astros series.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there are instances where that may have been lucrative, especially if you happen to be a Phillies fan this year.
exactly.
So what? Obviously, your enterprise has grown significantly, and online sports betting, at least at the scope that it operates, is relatively new as a concept because of various regulations on gambling and the like. I understand that you get a lot of new customers. What keeps them coming back?
I mean, I think the promotions are really what keeps people going. It's having good promotions and having a good product offering. If your site is easy to look at, then people will use it. If it's intricate, even at the base level, if the background colors aren't good to the eyes, then people aren't going to use it. There's so much competition in the industry right now that people will just go with what they're comfortable with. So if Caesars offers me a free $50 bet, I'm most likely going to use them and recycle the money that I used from that $50 bet and then redeposit with them just because they got me on. So I know BetMGM uses $1,000 risk-free. So people can deposit $1,000. If they lose their bet, they get $1,000 in site credit. So every company is kind of offering something similar. So it's a big, and that's the question. That's the fight for market share, is who's going to have the best promotions and who's going to market to the right people. So if anybody has a solution for that, our marketing team is all ears.
When you went in for your major at Syracuse, was marketing part of that track, or?
Yeah. I had always thought in the back of my head that marketing could be there. There was a sports marketing class in my major too that I enjoyed. I thought that it taught me a lot of what I wanted to do. So my program, one semester of our senior year is called a capstone, where we go and do an internship with an external internship with the company. And I spent my time as a marketing coordinator for Excel Sports Management, which is a sports agency. So I was working on the marketing team for a big agency, working on creative marketing campaigns and coming up with potential decks to recruit new clients. And I thought that had a really good opportunity. That was a good opportunity for me to be creative and go into marketing for my whole career. I can see myself going back down that road. It's why I didn't minor in marketing, but I had an area of emphasis on it so that I could focus on stuff like that. So I can see myself getting down the road. But I love my time at Excel, and I love sports marketing.
Okay. So something interesting just happened to me, something that I noticed before our interview. I was actually looking at the BetMGM website on my browser just to get a little more perspective. And when I scrolled through my Instagram feed, almost uncannily, I got an ad for BetMGM. How important is advertising? You personally, how important is advertising for your brand?
I think especially with sports betting, it is super important. The more times you see a logo, the more likely you are to download that app and deposit money. And that's why every commercial you see on TV right now is sports betting. Every billboard you see is a sports betting company. It's just, there's so much of it because everyone wants to be that brand that sticks in your head. And now you'll know, or Joe from Wisconsin knows that when he sees BetMGM, he's like, okay, I can use them and download right away. So it's really just about owning people's minds, which doesn't sound good, but the more times you see us, the more times the more likely you are to donate. And that's why they tell us to like wear our branded stuff around. So
Yeah, I mean it's basic psychology. The more
yeah.
exposure, the more likely you are to make the association. Um, so are there any significant challenges to sports betting aside from, say, market competition? Is there anything else that you may suggest would be a challenge or something that may be challenging?
It's a loaded question. Yeah, market competition is obviously the number one. Um, Performance of local teams is like our biggest like competition. So, for example, every single year we go in with the same mindset that if the Yankees, the Lakers, the Cowboys, or the Knicks win the championship, that we're going to lose money. So it's all just like it's going against the popular teams. So winning market share, yeah, that's the top point. But if the teams that everyone is betting on, if they win, then we're also screwed. So something to consider. It's just like if every favorite wins on an NFL Sunday, we're going to lose money. So it's overall, yes, market share, but week by week, it's result based that we struggle, that we try to not struggle with, but that we try to mitigate. The struggle is not really, to be honest, and that's why it's such a growing industry, because it's really just us versus the public's money and who gets the most of it.
That's fair. That's fair. So you're continuing to expand.
Hmm.
Um, how are, how far are you looking as a company to grow? Do you have the goals in terms of perhaps the amount of clientele you have or the amount of employees that you are looking to take in? Are there any sort of goals that you guys have sort of outlined for
Yeah.
future success?
So overall, from our goals, total wise, from like employees and states is kind of unknown based off of state regulations. Like we saw California just vetoed sports betting, and it wasn't even close. It was 83% no, 17% yes for sports betting in California. So we really don't know what to expect there, but our projections as far as sports betting handle for the next 3 years. So we projected $11 billion in handle this year, 15 billion next year, and then 30 billion the year after. So a lot of money, but continued growth, and down the road in the next 2 years, significant growth.
All right. I think we just about covered all the time that we needed for this interview. I'm glad that you came on the show. I personally felt like I learned something valuable here with someone who only had very vague, probably uneducated insight into sports betting. I feel like I have a better understanding of how the market functions and operates. And I feel like I got to know you better. And I'm just glad to see that you were able to find a way into a growth market and that you're comfortable there.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate. Thank you for having me. I actually learned I like to talk, so I'm happy that I can help teach you and others.
Welcome back. I just spoke with Adam Israel, who pursued his passion of sports up through college and into his career. He worked as a student football manager who assisted coaches and players at various games and practices. I felt that it was interesting that his experience with the team was very hands-on in his college years, going as far as coordinating the operations and needs of individual players and staff. I feel that it provided him with a solid foundation to pursue work in a wide array of sports-related industries. His initial aspirations in the sports industry were different from his line of work today, and I felt that it was difficult for him to have heard very early on as a college freshman that his dream of becoming a sports agent was discouraged by Michael Jordan's legendary sports agent, David Falk. Despite this, he still managed to find relevant work in the sports industry. His first job as a ticket services representative for the Mets was an interesting start for a newly graduated sports management major, yet the pandemic very quickly shifted his focus to sports betting. Having the Excel marketing internship served his interest to that end, and he was able to find work in a steadily growing sports betting industry. Just as ticket sales all but vanished due to the pandemic, by having the background in sports management and working for a major sports organization, Israel was able to distinguish himself as a job candidate at BetMGM and be signed on initially as a sportsbook operations coordinator. I find it interesting that he was able to stick to a sports-related field, even as his options dwindled and the future of sports seemed unknown. It was fortunate that his income potential grew in a relatively brief window of time, even after a layoff with the Mets, securing a promotion at BetMGM after only a year and a half on the job. He appears to have a solid grasp on the subject of sports betting, sharing insight on what he believes to be the most effective strategy for sports betting. It did not surprise me when he said that statistics was the most effective strategy, but when he mentioned that one did not have to be a sports fan to be a sports bettor, it made me think about the nature of the business in a different light. Whereas at first I initially thought of a successful sports bettor as an adamant, knowledgeable fan going off of a series of well-informed hunches, I began to imagine the potential for an individual apathetic to any particular team, merely capitalizing on data-driven predictions, citing a few variables that a sports bettor may consider when placing their bets, going even as specific as a point guard's likelihood of success against specific defenders or individual home run races. He illustrated the complexity of the business. Whereas some individuals, himself included, may bet simpler win or lose money lines with their hearts, others may bet on very complex parlays that follow a careful analysis of multiple variables in a sports event. To that end, even a shrewd gambler with a faint interest in sports may be effective if he has a higher than average understanding of the statistics. I agree with his assessment of the business as appearing overwhelming, yet I can also understand why the bets are so diverse, as it creates the potential for more complex parlays and, by extension, more profit for his business. The business strategy at BetMGM appears to be drawing in a lot of revenue, as the advertisements on sports channels and related media are persistent, and varying companies vying for the largest share of the sports betting market is indicative of a competitive market. BetMGM's use of promotional advertising, promising up to $1,000 of risk-free betting, seems to be an effective strategy for drawing in clients, who contribute to their lucrative industry that generates billions. Israel even goes as far as suggesting that the aesthetic details of their site contributes to the likelihood that a bettor would return to their website, indicating that there are a number of aspects to their image that consumers in the market may consider when deciding which site they use to place their bets. Although the sports betting market is projecting steady growth, there is still the desire for individual companies to hold the largest share of the market, hence why BetMGM is advertised so frequently and its website is brandished in bright contrasting colors. By building the brand recognition, associating the BetMGM logo with sports betting through continual exposure, respective new bettors are likely to go there with their money. Plastering their brand on billboards, commercials, and social media advertisements, they are banking on individuals to be enticed by potential payouts and utilize their brand to that end. Israel's use of the term owning their minds seemed apt, as it would suggest that owning their minds directly correlates with owning their business and taking shares of the market away from their competition. Another thing that I found interesting was the idea that sports betting companies lose money when the popular team wins. It makes sense, as a larger share of clients would win who bet with their hearts. Yet, sports seems to be a competitive enough market where these companies seem to be making handsome profits without losing their clients. Some of that profitability comes down to the complexity of some of the parlays, but I also imagine that the popular team loses frequently enough where the sports betting market remains competitive. Framing it as a sort of competition to keep the largest share of the public's money, Israel illustrates the desire for an expansive market with larger profit margins for BetMGM. suggesting that BetMGM has grown nearly 3 times in scope in 2 years at the company, despite a recent California veto of sports betting. He indicates that his brand will only continue to grow and capitalize on profits brought about through sports betting. Overall, Adam Israel was an insightful guest who provided us with some unique insider perspective. Coming from someone who only had a vague understanding of sports betting, I feel that he effectively illustrated the appeal of it and the growth potential for the business. His persistence in finding meaningful work through the pandemic is commendable, as his furlough from the Mets merely paved the way for his work at BetMGM. His work ethic is admirable as well, attaining a lead role in a company that he had only joined 17 months prior. I respect his position as a sportsbook ops team lead and admire his passion for the industry, adamantly displaying his brand and portraying his satisfaction with his work. The way he speaks very highly of the company he represents and its current and future success indicates that he is happy with his work and seeking to be a prime contributor to his growth. He has attained what many up-and-coming young professionals dream of, work that aligns with their passions and provides for them with more than just monetary value. By finding work that enables him to tap into his creative mind and feel freer in that sense, it gives prospective students interested in work in a sports-related field hope that they may attain something similar in their own pursuits. I thank him for coming on and giving us his time and insight, and wish that his company finds continued success. I imagine his work ethic will lead him to continued success and that he will continue to be a leader in the sports industry. That was Beyond the Game Sports Podcast, and we thank you for tuning in.